Hello and welcome back to Chat About It, Don't Shout About It with me, Rachel, the Queen of the Woke, as crowned by one of my haters. Today is Doctor Who Sunday, which means we are reviewing Terror of the Autons as voted by you on the community poll. Thank you for my nightmares. If you would like to vote on the current poll, then head on over to the community page on this channel after this video, where you will find it. I update it every Saturday. Terror of the Autons is a third Doctor story. It was written by Robert Holmes, directed by Barry Letts. It aired between 2nd of January to the 23rd of January 1971, and the average overnight ratings of all 4 episodes together were 8 million people. The Doctor is still stranded on Earth and is working for UNIT. Liz Shaw has left and is replaced by Jo Grant, the new secretary. After a very rocky start, the Doctor and Jo work together to take down the newly introduced Time Lord, the Master. They establish that the Master wants the Autons to take out the Doctor, but the Autons have an ulterior motive, because why not? This is Doctor Who. And they want to beam the radio waves to conquer the world. It then becomes a race against time to stop them, and the Doctor and the Master work together in order to do so. Now, straight off the bat, I would actually like to ask you, the viewer, what is it about the Autons that made them decide at the time to bring them back? And truly, was it a good idea? Now, I actually think the story is a good story, but it's nowhere near as good as the predecessor, because to me, an alien like the Autons must be used sparingly. And that's not because they terrify me. Oh, no, 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 no. They still do. But they turn into a bit of a comical joke if you're not careful, or they run the risk of it anyway. The Master stealing part of the Nestine consciousness is a good idea. However, what do you really do with it other than a similar idea to last time? We even see that to some degree, we see that to some degree with Rose as well. Excuse me, I lost my trail of thought there, but it's true. There's limitations with it, which is probably why they didn't bring it back again with the rest of the Doctors until the 2005 series. Now, those giant plastic heads, known as the Daffodil Man Auton, to be frank, whilst they look scary to me as someone who finds those kinds of things scary, they can also come across as comical. And I'm not saying that they are. Like I said again, it is a risk to take. Does it become a joke? What do you think? I think, though, what looks the most comical to an adult is probably the plastic chair. The actor certainly sold being suffocated by the plastic chair, something within itself that would be considered scary, especially to children, because it's a very real object. And the idea about plastic being controlled like that to do something like that, that's scary. However, it does remind me of the B horror movie, The Blob. I didn't find that film scary, but my brother did, and it just that whole sort of swelling of the black plastic around the actor, yeah, that made me think of that. And I don't know if that's a good thing or if that's a bad thing. What do you think? Now, I'm not knocking the people behind these effects. They have to work with what they had at the time and rely on the actors to make it fully believable. This doesn't make it bad if it's not believable, though. I don't like the updated effects that they do for the Blu-rays, as I feel it actually snubs the original work and the efforts that was originally put in. Still, to this day, one of my favourite poor stunt and effects that they did in Doctor Who actually comes from Battlefield, which is a much, much later story in the terms of classic era when effects were much better, and I still wouldn't change it for the world. Now, this episode, whilst I'm still on the chair, played host of turning things that are completely innocent, such as daffodils, into a threat. The daffodils I'm actually okay with, but the episode generated a lot of complaints because of the police being Autons. And I actually agree with the sentiments here. Now, whilst police corruption is a very real thing, and you can certainly make an allegory towards it, putting it into something where children are watching this kind of program is probably not the best idea. Children and young people need to be able to trust the police, and the mistrust because of this episode that could have been actually realized. I'm not saying that it did, but it could have been a very real thing indeed. We also get an updated version of the Autons. Now, the question is, did they really need to update them so soon? It was only the series before that we had the original Autons, and I actually think the more lifelike they look, the more scary that they are. Now, which do you prefer? The original one, which kind of looks more lifelike because of the shape of the face, or this one that we have right now, which you can see on the screen, a bit shapeless and a bit sort of formless and no expression behind it at all. And by the way, which classic master do you prefer? They have toyed with the idea of having a Time Lord before, and I say this loosely, adversary to the Doctor in the form of the war chief in the war games, and easily it easily proved that they can have the light and the dark to the Time Lords. So it would make sense for them to actually introduce a new Time Lord, and it took the shape of the Master this time. And this is a character that has remained in Doctor Who until present day and has been played by multiple actors. Now, the Delgado Master in this case, I think that this master is very suave and sophisticated, a little pompous and very sinister. The fact that he can actually hypnotize people at will and transform them into miniatures is actually a very dark and scary thing altogether. Now, we don't really get this with the current day master so much, and in fact it was actually Chibs who brought back the master's habit of shrinking people with a tissue compression eliminator, which Sasha Darwin used in that era of Doctor Who. Now, Delgado is actually very commanding. He actually uses his voice to do a lot of the work rather than his face, and this doesn't actually pull focus from the episode at all. However, you do know who's in control with the cast. You know it's him. You know he has the power in that scene, and it's just that aura that he gives off about him. And would you really have guessed he would become one of the longest serving Time Lord characters in the history of the show? You really wouldn't. And we've had quite a few. Now, there's one scene that happens in this that I'm not too keen on. A random Time Lord turns up to warn the Doctor about the Master coming to Earth to seek him out. Now, was this scene really needed? I always prefer it when the Doctor gets a shock instead of receiving a warning. It felt to me, and I don't want to be rude here, but it feels like to me it was a little bit of a filler for this episode. Maybe they didn't have something that could go there. I don't know really. Or maybe they just wanted to toy around with some other form of Time Lord, with another idea of the Time Lords traveling in a different way. But having said that, I actually think, though, the worst aspect of that scene for me was the fact that he didn't arrive in a TARDIS. Whilst he does state that he travelled far and the whatnot, it's not immediately clear that he was a Time Lord. When I first watched it originally, I remember thinking for the majority of the scene, why on earth does the Doctor know this person, and who is he, and where does he come from? I just couldn't compute it in my head. And then, of course, we find out towards the end of the scene that he is actually a Time Lord. And I'm like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But I felt like that should have been clearer at the start of the scene. Now, another thing to me personally that doesn't seem true to character was actually the Brigadier signing the Nestine consciousness over to the museum. Well, part of the Nestine consciousness, I should say, because it's in the little sphere, isn't it? Why on earth would a soldier who works in the realms of alien intelligence do something as foolish as that? Surely that would actually be a very top secret thing indeed. And I also wasn't too keen on the Autons talking. They didn't really need to. The only reason that they did was so that they could actually advance the screenplay forward along to the end with the Autons' ulterior motive and why they're going with the Master. I'm also pretty sure that the Doctor could have worked out the Autons were going to try and use some form of radio wave, seeing as they were activated in a similar way in Spearhead from Space. I know it wasn't exactly the same because there was only one energy unit in that episode that was left, but it was enough to cause the damage that it did. Now, that being said, this episode was not without its jump scares and some pretty good cliffhangers, even if this was the weaker of the two Auton stories. The double cross of the Autons at the end was, of course, to be expected. However, it was the reveal of the Master being supposedly shot that was more shocking than that of the actual original double cross. He was living up to his name. He was the Master. He was the master of disguise. And that was a trait that we would see with him very often, all the way throughout Classic and even into New Who today. Now, Googe also being shrunk small enough to fit in his lunchbox, the Doctor pulling the police Auton mask off, whilst I don't agree, that should have been in there. It was still really, really shocking to see. Jo getting plastic fired into her face, the cord of the phone wrapping itself around the Doctor's neck, the Doctor stealing the dematerialization circuit, and it didn't work for him, but it actually served as a plot point for the Master not being able to escape. That massive stunt of the Auton being knocked down that quarry slope. Goodness me, that must have been quite a risk to take with that one. And who would have expected that Auton being behind that safe door? Yes, okay, that's a typical horror trope in many respects, but they hardly used that in Doctor Who. And of course, Jo being controlled by hypnosis and going to set off an explosion which was against her will. Now, I actually think that Jo is a much better adversary than Liz Shaw in this case. I know Barry Letts had decided against bringing her back as her contracted time had actually ended, and I believe she was actually pregnant, so the chances of her actually coming back were virtually zero anyway. And it's with a heavy view that I actually do say that, because whilst it is a shame that she had to go at the decision of the producer Barry Letts, it made sense to bring in the character of Jo to be beside the Doctor instead. Liz Shaw was way too intelligent, so the only questions came from the other companion, the Brigadier, who has always been a great adversary to the Doctor anyway, even though that they were really at loggerheads in this particular one anyway. So Jo's demeanor, her smarts in her other areas, such as escapology, her naivety, made it a great companion for the Doctor, because it would bring back the type of grandfather aspect that we would actually see from the other two Doctors. We hadn't had that really as of yet with the Pertwee Doctor, and that's just my opinion. So it's about time that we really got to be able to see it. I also think that John Pertwee probably preferred it too. I think he liked working with Caroline John, from what I can tell. Well, anyway, the acting together was phenomenal. But, I think as the Brigadier is pretty much a grounded character because he remains at the base a lot, the Pertwee Doctor would need the other companion that goes around with him to truly ask the questions needed when they are away from the brig. And I just don't think we would have got that with Liz Shaw, or at least not to the extent that we actually got it from Jo. Maybe, though, the Doctor would have reached his conclusions about the Autons quicker had Liz actually been there, but then if that happened, there wouldn't have been 4 parts. So John was also great here too, by the way. I much preferred this version of his Doctor, more thoughtful, pensive, occasionally snappy, but no fistfights. The fistfight aspect, I really don't like that about his Doctor, you see. That's just my opinion, of course. If you like it, that's absolutely fine. The pacing of Terror of the Autons is actually pretty good, I would say. Think, though, I will say this. I prefer it in Classic Who, where they set up the resolution an episode earlier. So, for example, in the Colin Baker story, The Mark of the Rani, you see the Doctor tampering with the Rani's TARDIS. What you don't realize is that this was actually a setup for her downfall in an earlier episode. So it was happening in an earlier episode, and then you find out in the final episode that he was setting up her downfall, basically. And I like it where you are wondering what on earth the Doctor is actually doing at that point. And then later on, it actually clicks into place that he was setting up the enemy for failure. I like it when they keep you guessing like that. That's what they do here. I just wish that they had actually started it a lot sooner than that. I guess, though, that you could say, just to throw in a bit of devil's advocate here, they did try that from the point of the view with the Brigadier and the airstrike, but I don't think, for me personally, they did it with the Doctor enough. Now, this doesn't actually make it a letdown in any way, because I think the double cross of the Master was really the whole point to the ending, making him more dangerous and making the viewer, wonder what on earth he is doing and ask the question, will he be back? Which, of course, he does actually come back. Now, of course, that is what I think. So I'm bound to have left some things out. So you need to let me know what you think. Now, make sure that you head on over to the community page where you can vote on the current poll. I release Doctor Who videos every Sunday, and then in the other days, I tend to cover other topics such as TV and film, TikToks, woke, and some good news. However, Shooty Gatwa has stirred things up again, and it's really important that I actually cover it tomorrow for the TV and movie Monday. So you get an extra video Doctor Who in the week. So make sure you have tuned in for that at 4 p.m. Chat about it, don't shout about it. Like and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye bye.